Well, it's been a long time since we've been able to podcast some really good news, and we have some great news when it comes to those who plan with these individual pension plans. An individual pension plan is a defined benefit pension plan, something that you usually see in large government or unionized operations. It's one of these defined benefit pension plans offered to usually a senior executive or an owner manager. And the major benefit when you're doing an IPP is the ability to backdate the IPP, to retroactively implement it, and then pick up a really large what's called past service deduction. And in 2011, March 22nd, 2011 to be exact, the federal government released their budget for the year, and they basically decimated the ability for an owner-manager to do these past service implementations. It really was the end of individual pension plans for owner-managers, which was the largest share of the market. Now, what was interesting about this release of the budget was they didn't have the legislation drafted to support their policy decision, so it created an information gap. And so we've been sitting for most of 2011 waiting to see how they're going to actually codify these changes, which would be very difficult to do and incredibly unjust to certain taxpayers. So we've been waiting all year for the codification, and now it's been released. And here's where we call the podcast IPPs Resurrected. We went from a position where CRA was telling us they were more or less shutting down the ability to do past service on IPPs for owner managers, to a codification or a position that really isn't going to affect many Canadians at all. What they've done is they've left the old rules in place. So when you set up an IPP for an owner manager, you still calculate a certain amount of RSP money that has to be transferred into the plan. This is called the qualifying transfer. So those qualifying transfers remain as is. The only thing that's now being added to the legislation is the qualifying transfer, or the deduction that's created from the qualifying transfer, is tested based on how much RSP money that annuitant has. So if that annuitant has RSP balances that are in excess of about $700,000, then they're going to actually reduce the deduction available for past service. And this is just an interesting way for the feds to sort of protect themselves politically, that somebody who's done very well with an RSP couldn't go and set up an IPP and do very well with that as well. And as bizarre as that all sounds, that's the rule of thumb. About $700,000, which very few Canadians have in an RSP in their name. As long as they're under $700,000 roughly in their name, then they'll be able to continue to proceed with an IPP just as they have for the last decade and get the large past service deductions. This is great news, and certainly news that'll stimulate many owner managers in Canada to have a look at IPPs in 2011 or in 2012.